Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, wherever you are. Big warm welcome from me. I'm Ashley Owen. I'm the head of product marketing here at Opsamex. Delighted to welcome you all to this webinar, Simplify CD with Spinnaker using the Autopilot Community Edition. We're very excited about this. Joining me today, I have my colleague Balaji, and I will hand over to him. I think all of you know him very well, so I'll hand over to him in a second. Yeah, before we get started, just quick housekeeping. If you have any questions during the presentation, we encourage you to type them into the chat box of the Q&A, and I'll return at the end to run some polls. So over to you, Balaji.
All right, thanks, Ashley. Great to be here, and I'm excited to talk about our new Autopilot Community Edition product for the targeting essentially the open source Spinnaker community. If you are running Spinnaker, open source Spinnaker in production, for example, and you would really love the product in terms of what it can add to it. The Community Edition is a free edition. Obviously, that means that you can use it forever for free. And we also have an enterprise version of the Autopilot. I will describe to you what the differences are in a second. But we expect that with the Autopilot Community Edition or the Enterprise Edition, you're going to make your life easier with Spinnaker, running CD with Spinnaker in terms of configuration, approvals, verification, security, and so on and so forth. So I want to give you a quick introduction of Opsamex for people who are first time hearing about it or haven't heard about it in a while. We are an intelligent software delivery company. By the way, before we go there, my name is Balaji, and as Ashley mentioned, I run products at Opsamex. I've been a part of the Spinnaker community for over 5 years now, and I've been presenting in multiple Spinnaker summits, and you may have seen me before. Feel free to say hi or email me or send me a Twitter message. All right, with that, Opsamex is an intelligent software delivery company. Our vision has been to be able to allow you to deliver software without human intervention. And that's a big, tall order if you think about the velocity of software delivery these days, right? I used to work in large companies before where we used to deliver software once a month or maybe more than a month. And there's a multiple QA cycle, there's a big high ceremony release process and whatnot. But nowadays, people are expecting you to deliver software without multiple times a day, multiple teams doing the same things. So thousands of releases potentially in updates in a month. So how do you do that without human intervention? You actually have to remove the humans because you're going to either make mistakes or you're going to delay the process, right? So the way we do it is we have a platform called the Intelligent Software Delivery Platform, ISD for short, and it has two components. One is the Autopilot, which is essentially the piece I'm going to talk about today, which provides you some of the intelligence that you need to automate the release process. And then the Spinnaker, which is essentially the typical delivery orchestration, the typically you would expect from a CI/CD tool like Spinnaker or Jenkins and Argo that you're already familiar with. So we are adding this Autopilot layer to help you to even accelerate the delivery process. As far as our Spinnaker involvement is concerned, we have been contributing for the last 5 years, and thousands plus contributions, a lot of committers and SIG leaders, etc. We are active part of the community. We have multiple enterprises who have trusted us to support Spinnaker, and you see some of the logos here. And they're also leveraging our Autopilot feature set to further enhance their Spinnaker experience. So what are we talking about here in terms of the problem set? You're all familiar with a code to cloud kind of a pipeline model that Spinnaker and any other CI/CD tool essentially provides. And you want to be able to do all these processes. Ideally, you want to do it in an automated fashion, so you're not trying to handcraft a script for each of the deployment process for each of the services by different teams. So first part of the problem is if you don't have Spinnaker in the audience, you should consider Spinnaker or Spinnaker-like solution that allows you to orchestrate the code to cloud deployment, right, in a safe, reliable fashion. So without scripting, multi-cloud, be able to roll back, roll forward, etc. The second part that we are pretty passionate about at Opsamex is allowing you to even make faster deployments with lower risk and be able to do automated approvals, be able to do policy checks, security checks, ensure that the things that you're releasing in production, it doesn't involve issues that you would end up having to call it a production failure or security or compliance risk, for example. Also, if something does go wrong, it's a software anyway, so you will not be able to catch every issue that happens. So you want to really figure out, during your canary or progressive deployment, make sure things are working. Even if it does go to production and you have to roll back, you want to go back and analyze what happened. Right? So all of these things are time-consuming tasks today, and our solution is is essentially meant to solve that. So what is our primary solution? We take the open source Spinnaker, which is, you see the light blue bar here. These things that comes with the open source Spinnaker. If you're already using Spinnaker, you're very familiar with the way to create pipelines, way to create automated workflows in a UI format or in a code format. All of those things you're probably familiar with. It obviously includes built-in support for multi-cloud deployments. So Google, Azure, and AWS, Kubernetes, etc. is pre-built, available, pull-down menu essentially. That way you don't have to worry about how do I deploy a VM in a AWS versus in a GCP, or same with GKE versus AKS, EKS. And also you have built-in ability to create safe deployment strategies like canary or a blue-green or rolling update kind of a deployment models. And Spinnaker is an extensible product, and so people have used it to deploy to not only the traditional VM containers and functions, but also to extend to other use cases. So what are we providing on top of the Spinnaker is essentially allow you to easily deploy and operate Spinnaker, which is actually a task for many people. If you're using Spinnaker in production, you're probably familiar with all the tasks involved there. So we make it easy to deploy on-prem, that is in your premises. Or if you say, you know what, I don't want to do anything with managing the Spinnaker, give me a software as a service. So we provide that as well. We not only do that, we worry about the next steps. I would call that day zero is the operation part of it, like you install and maintain, etc. The day one part is you want to onboard new applications and new groups of users once the Spinnaker is up and running, right? And so that we want to make it easier. And there's some enhancements we have made there, self-service, etc. The other part is like now that I'm deploying pipelines, I want to maintain pipeline as code. I want to do templating. I want to maintain things in Git, and then be able to almost do a GitOps style management. Those things are also becomes the second order problems. Another thing that people have come to us is around extensions beyond the base Spinnaker. Like I need to be able to deploy. I want to stand up the infrastructure. I'm using Terraform. Can I do that before I deploy to that particular infrastructure, right? So maybe you want to include Terraform creation, a Terraform-based infrastructure setup through the Spinnaker pipeline. Or maybe you want to update the database schema or data migration, and you can do that all with Spinnaker, and we can help you with that. And last but not the least is security. Make sure that there's no vulnerability in the open source Spinnaker, and there's a future proofing of that. So that's what we call is our OpsMx Enterprise for Spinnaker. Think of it as our version of Spinnaker with our bells and whistles to help you with that. But that's not where we stop. We actually go beyond that. And this is where we are really Today, most of the talk is going to be about this Autopilot module. We call it the data and intelligence module. The way it works is it sucks in all the data from various data sources along the pipeline, all the way from source code to the deployment monitoring tools, and then provide a value on top of it. So what are those values that we provide on top that further enhances the deployment process, ease of deployment and risk-free deployments, is things around automated verification, ability to verify the risk of an application, ability to automate approvals. Today, if you look at it, typically it's if you look at the approval process in a Spinnaker, you have a manual judgment process, that really stops the pipeline and you have to approve, but that's really not that interesting in the sense that it only gives you yes or no button. It doesn't really tell you whether you should approve or not. It just gives you a stop sign, and then you have to still make all the checks and balances yourself. So those are the one of the things that we're going to talk about today. And then how do you ensure governance of the things that's going on? You have lots of developers, a lot of teams deploying now in an automated fashion through your CD platform. Now, how do you ensure governance across all of these things, as well as security, make sure that things are not going haywire when you enable developers to do anything in the platform? And also, you want to also enable observability, what's going on for developers, for SREs, for DevOps managers, and as well as for DevSecOps kind of folks. You want to be able to understand some of the traceability aspects of it. So that's the overall solution, overall platform, which is the what we call the intelligent software related platform. Today, we are excited to announce the Autopilot Community Edition, and I'll talk to you in a second. So what is Autopilot, just as a backdrop again, is to be able to do ML-based, machine learning-based verification. Allows you to analyze risk across the entire pipeline and be able to tell you what the risks are, and so that you avoid failures in production. Automated approvals, ability to make the right decisions in pipeline so that you're able to reduce the risk in software delivery, right? We automate the collection of all the data. As we talked about, we provide rich insights and allow you to do evaluation of those in an automated fashion. And then things around governance. You want to ensure things are the developers using the product are using the right way, and compliance is followed not only for your enterprise compliance, but also for regulatory compliance. You want to basically enable also security checks and make sure that the artifact that is getting deployed is the artifact that is approved, etc. And then end-to-end visibility across different environments, ability to trace what's happened, and look at audit data, to time to infinity, right? Now, the Autopilot itself product works across different tools. Obviously, Spinnaker being, we know obviously it works on Spinnaker, and today we're going to talk about how it works on open source Spinnaker. But it also can be used to work with Argo or Jenkins or Kubernetes-based deployments or Azure DevOps or other CD tools. So that it's not that this intelligence is for any CD, and so you can leverage it if you're using some other CD tools. But today we will primarily focus on Spinnaker. So the Community Edition essentially is same as an Enterprise Edition, no feature differences in that sense, but we are limiting to about 20 intelligence gates. Intelligence gates could be an approval gate or a policy gate or a verification gate, and so you're in the sense that you're able to leverage everything you see here and more beyond as we start adding more features. But you are limited in the number of pipelines or number of applications or services you would use this. We're also limiting the audit data for about a week audit data. Obviously, in the Enterprise Edition, there is no limit, but it is a licensed product per user who they're using the product. And the Community Edition today, we are focused primarily on the OSS Spinnaker, and the Enterprise Edition, we are supporting other tools like Argo and Jenkins, etc. Now, so why do we need all of this in the first place? Why do we need Autopilot? And let's say I have Spinnaker. Why do I need this? So if you look at different things that is happening between different obviously there are different personas in the sense that there's a DevOps engineer, there's a DevSecOps, there's an SRE, there's a product owner. Everybody cares something differently about the whole thing, right? A product owner cares differently from what an SRE would care about. So there are certain things they are doing. They want to automate some of the things they're doing in different stages of from dev to deployment, right? Dev to production. So for dev and staging, you are doing, you want to, do automated SAS analysis. That's the analysis they're doing. And how do I approve it from QA to staging, make sure that things are stopped early in the process and without going to production and failing. In the deployment to production use case, you're worried about progressive deployments. You are worried about what kind of production policy that I need to follow to make sure that I'm not breaking anything. Obviously here, the SRE will get involved, the DevSecOps will get involved, and obviously the DevOps team is still involved. But also global processes that different people care about is essentially, can I audit? Can I do tracing? And maybe a DevOps manager would want to know the DORA metrics, for example. How is my CD or how is my software team performing? In a lot of things. So you can see here, there are a lot of need, and that's not necessarily solved by the sort of the CD tool like Spinnaker, right? These things are, what I would call outside of Spinnaker in some ways. So let me get into a little more detail here to give you a little more color to what I'm talking about. Risk verification. So how do I verify risk? I'm deploying it to multiple stages, QA, staging, and production. What I need to worry about in each stage is different. In QA, I'm worried about certain things. In production, I'm worried about certain things. You can enable, typically you have multiple different types of tools that are being used in different parts of your pipeline. And you want to be able to analyze these risks at real time, for every release, essentially for every time. So manual verifications are going to be time consuming, obviously error prone because it's not consistent, reliable over time. You maybe have to look at logs and metrics. Maybe you have to look at other data tools that are part of the delivery chain. And it's difficult to correlate if you're doing it in a human fashion. It's difficult to understand, hey, what was going on in the last 6 months? I don't know if I'm the new SRE or new engineer who joined the team. So, and also when you do approve it, how do I go back in time and look at what happened? Why did I approve? What did I see? What did somebody see before they approved the production? These are important data points. So our automated verification feature or use case here is, is intelligent event verification. So whether you're deploying, through Blue Green or a Canary or a rolling update, or you're verifying during the testing phase, we do a lot of things to understand and identify risk for you and give you the risk information to you. So we use many techniques in the back end. Obviously, we will do the statistical analysis to look at past data. We are using machine learning, like neural network-based algorithms in the back end to identify metrics and the risk evaluation of the metrics. For log, for example, we do natural language processing and automatically classify logs and understand historically, how this is normal, not normal. We're also looking at, we're also predicting risk based on data across the delivery chain. So the way we do it is we observe, application deployments over time. We learn about an application profile or a general profile of things, and then we apply our models to analyze the risk score and give you that results. And that you can enable during deployment, like a typical Canary, Blue Green, etc., or you can deploy even in the test verification stage. So next part is around, I'm calling the informed automated approval. So again, this is, let's say, think of it as a manual judgment. If you're using Spinnaker, you're probably familiar with manual judgment stage, right? You have basically a stage with just stops and ask somebody to click on it, right? Which is great, but then it doesn't really tell me whether I should click on it. The guy who's clicking on it to go forward has to do all the work to understand whether you should click yes or no. I don't know. So it doesn't tell you much about beyond that. So that's what we are coming in. With all the data sources, we are able to we want to allow you to reduce time, because currently if you're approving, I have to go through different tools, evaluating multiple tools, and again, I'm just trying to understand historically whether it's right or wrong. And then you also have many approvals, right? Not only QA approval, staging approval, SRE approval, et cetera, et cetera. And also what I've heard from customers is that many approvals are really automatable, right? Essentially, you still have this manual judgment, but it's not that complicated, right? They have to do certain checks and balances, and they can be done in an automated fashion, but today it's not done. And so you're essentially adding delay for no reason. So again, depending on who you are, and where you are in the core to cloud, you have different kinds of approvals. The dev approval is different from a QA approval, is different from staging to production approvals. And the data that you look in to approve from a dev to QA to staging is different. Each stage is different. And you can see some of the names, some of the things that people look at typically to do approvals. And also there could be policies, right? Maybe the QA should not approve if there are, source code analysis says there are severe bugs, or maybe the staging should not approve the production if the QA tickets are not being closed properly. So today, people can bypass those, and you're at the mercy of somebody making the right call all the time. And so with this kind of a tool, you can actually prevent that kind of human errors or human mistakes. So one of the other sort of essential things around approvals or generally checking to enforce policies is that today it's like really tribal knowledge. Let's say a pipeline is coming to production and I have a manual judgment or whatever, and I don't know whether I should approve today or not. Maybe today is one of the important days in the company because there is a financial update date or is a very critical production date. But that information is not necessarily enforced by system. You have to know it. The guy who is like essentially tribal knowledge, right? What is normal? What is normal? So maybe it's in a wiki list. Maybe he goes to a wiki checklist and say, okay, is this production time? Is it not production time? Should I approve the production or not? Maybe there's a wiki list that's probably outdated. Or you're trying to hard code in scripts, check all these 20 things before you go to production. So all these things are, meant to be is going to break, and you're going to have problems. You're going to have inconsistency. So, and obviously the risk of not enforcing the policies could be disastrous for business reasons or security or regulation reasons. Could be a lot more damage to be done. So, one of the things we try to do is enable automated and reliable enforcement of policy. So you could check for SOX compliance. You could check, these are some of the actual, some of the policies that some of our customers have enabled, across their pipelines so that, these policies could run at all the time, or could be running during a runtime of a pipeline. So you can prevent things being changed in even the pipeline being modified, or you can sort of enforce it during the runtime. Again, every policy could have different users who wants to ensure. SRE may be worried about deploying during production hours because he has a policy that says, hey, you shall not be triggering production pipelines during 9 to 4 p.m., for example. And so, he can't personally ensure that whoever is approving the production is actually aware of it or going to follow it every single time. And so you don't want that kind of a problem during the for production use case. So these are some of the things you could do. And last but not the least is around, you're deploying multiple applications, multiple services across multiple environments, and what's running in each environment. What is the health of these applications? What versions of these are running? Who initiated the deployment? Who approved it? What is in that deployment? What is part of the deployment process? None of them is actually clear if you do at scale. And Spinnaker does a good job of showing some of this data, but not all of it. And so not having all data is actually bad because you may have some blind spots that will get you in trouble. So these are some of the things that we try to solve with our Autopilot use case. as you can see, if you're familiar with Spinnaker, for example, you probably are familiar that, hey, whatever you told me, I'm not going to be able to do with just plain OS Spinnaker. And maybe you can try to figure out one or two things, but you don't want to figure out everything. So what are some of the use cases for overall platform as well as Autopilot specifically? Obviously, overall platform is meant for diverse application deployment. Spinnaker obviously does a good job of it, and we extended beyond that. You could deploy both hybrid and multi-cloud. And one of the use cases that we are continuously seeing is that use case of CD as a service. Like you have a central team that's deploying, that's allowing multiple other teams to use the platform as almost a service, internal CD as a service. That means you need to enable self-service. You don't want the central team to be sort of the blocker for every time somebody wants to add a new target, right? Somebody wants to add a new application. So you don't want, somebody wants to use a new Jenkins. You don't want to, hey, can I create a ticket for it? Or can I ask the central team to create it for me? That's not really a good use case. You don't want to keep it completely open either, because anybody can do anything. Then you're going to end up in different set of problems. Or you want to improve release quality through verifications. You want to do intelligent promotions of releases between different stages. And obviously, you want to eliminate risk or compliance, security and compliance risks. So you want to have a continuous governance, security checks all the time, and be able to audit and traceability of the devices. So hopefully you are able to follow along. I know I was going at a little rapid pace. I'm going to switch now to a demo. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more color to what I talked about. And feel free to ask questions in the chat or Q&A section, and I will address it in the end. Before I go to production, demo, I want to just share an example of an online leader, a customer of ours was essentially using Jenkins to deploy software, and they essentially using Autopilot as a way to intelligently make decisions to approving to production, right? And that's something that for them it took them a few hours. They have multiple engineers online whenever they have to approve something to production. It's very expensive for them in terms of number of people involved and also delays involved in approving things to production. And they're essentially using our Autopilot solution to be able to automatically verify and approve updates to production. And obviously you can see the time reduced in terms of from 3 to 4 hours to less than 10 minutes. And obviously that means you're saving lots of dollars in terms of not having senior engineers on call available for every update to production. They have like one other application they have deploys 1,000 times a month, and that's just one application. So you can imagine how many, hours they have to spend to, it may not be even practically possible to do that many hours, honestly. So that's why they want to use something like an automated tooling to help them to make better decisions. With that, I'm going to go to the demo. So, so let's assume that you are, you can, by the way, you can go to download the product at this URL here, or you can submit a request and we'll reach back to you, or anybody who's attending today we'll get an automated access to the product, so you don't have to worry about it. Don't ask me. You don't have to worry about it. We'll get an email automatically which tells you, hey, here's how you can try it out. So the way you would start off, obviously, is make sure that you are connecting to the Spinnaker. If assuming you're using Spinnaker in the back end, you can connect to a Spinnaker that's already set up, right? You are already running in production Spinnakers. That means you can just go and add your Spinnaker, and then now you can also add other things here, like you want to add a new targets, for example. You can add it. Maybe your so you can do many of those things. You can add integrations like Jenkins. You want to add a Jenkins or some other things as part of your Spinnaker pipeline that you want to enable, like Jenkins or other things, GitHub, for example, you can add all of these things right from the UI right here. So let's assume now that you have connected to Spinnaker and you're ready to go. You essentially then sync your applications with Spinnaker. Then it really brings in all the applications from Spinnaker into our platform. You can see where the source of these applications are coming from. And then you can start getting some value out of it. So you can go to the application dashboard and look at, what are the applications that you have, how many services each of the applications have, how many deployments are happening, is there any pending approvals of this application, is there any policy violation and verification. Obviously, when you start off, you may not have policy violation because you haven't set the policies yet. But once you enable policies, you can start seeing it. You want to see how the deployments are going on. You can obviously drill down into the applications. In this case, there's 2 services. It has 3 different clusters or 3 different namespaces. That this is a Kubernetes-based deployment. So there's a QA namespace, there's a production namespace, or dev namespace, or different clusters, whichever, doesn't matter. Think of these as account in Spinnaker, right? If you're probably familiar with accounts in Spinnaker concept. So these are accounts in Spinnaker. So you can then see that there are different accounts, different targets, and you have different power services, and you have different versions potentially running across the different versions. Maybe the QA is running a certain version, production is running a certain version. In this case, 1.3.1 is running in QA, 1.2.10 is running in the production, because usually the QA is learning the latest version as they're trying to evaluate things. You can drill down at a service level and look at the deployments happening there, as well as across different environments right here. In this case, it's a demo, so every version is the same. You're just redeploying the application differently. But typically, you would see different versions. You can also look at what kind of instances are running and who approved it and what the status, etc. If you want to understand, this is where we come in with the traceability and sort of more visibility. This is obviously giving you a lot of visibility. Not only you're looking at the current deployments, but I can also look at what are the deployment, where are the deployments over the period of time. So you can also have a great history. This history goes as long as you have data for, as long as you can have the data, we allow you to have it. And that really allows you to have a historical view of it. And the other thing I want to show you is that not only we show you obviously this deployment happened at this time and who approved, etc., but also you can get into what was in the deployment, for example, like what is that image, what is this thing added, in terms of new things changed. For example, I can look at what are the code check-in, what are the different things that are merged in this case. In this case, there's only a small update that's going on, but I can really look at what are the Git check-in that went in as part of this particular deployment, for example. I can look at any Jira tickets that are part of it. For example, I have multiple Jira tickets that had different priorities and the status of it as well. And we are trying to constantly improving on the UI and everything else, so you would see better visualization in the next releases. You can also look at obviously you can go to the tickets if you like directly and see what's going on in that particular ticket as well. All the data sources are linked. You can look at SonarQube if there is a SonarQube that you have enabled. Maybe there's Jenkins, so you can look at, hey, I want to understand what the build was, what was part of the build. I can again click here. I'm not sure it'll go in now. I have to sign in, but basically, you could understand what was part of the build. Right, all the information is right there. So this is really useful. And also, I don't have to. This is obviously the current version, but I can also look in the past. If there's anything that happened. So what is this particular version did? So a lot of the things are pretty traceable. And this is really useful because something got deployed and you want to understand what happened, then you can look at whether the policy all allowed. Okay, every policy is good. The dev policy, QA policy, fraud policy. Obviously, you can have as many policies as you want. You can have SOX policy, other kinds of policies. So all of the policies we can check off for you automatically, and in some cases automatically approve it. If you look here, there are multiple gates, so-called gates. There are verification at different levels. There's approvals enabled. and there's also policy enabled. One of the things I talked about is obviously this is what I'm showing you is sort of the traceability aspect of it. If you want to look at it from an audit trail perspective, the same similar type of information, you can look at it from an audit trail perspective, right? So for example, now I see, everybody's familiar with pipeline runs in the Spinnaker use case. So you can look at how many pipelines were run, what was done, if something, the status of the pipelines. You can look at all the data that we suck in as part of the pipeline. Not only the Spinnaker data, but also data from all the data sources that are connected to it, like Jenkins and other things. You can all search and do things. So you can have as many data that we have the data layer, and you can see all the data you can enable to try to fine tune what you want to search for, basically. But if you want to go right into, okay, this one failed, what was the problem? So I can go right here. So you have your Spinnaker in the back end that you're familiar with, and it tells you right there, okay, this is an ECS demo and this failed for whatever reason, right? And you can see that particular pipeline status, something happened here, right, for example. So you can see right from here. So that's the audit piece. Obviously, you have ability to audit pipeline changes. If somebody made changes to pipelines, you can see what change was made and who changed the pipelines, etc. That's also available for you. You also, if you have policies, you can see the policy execution data as well. Now that's the part around traceability and visibility, etc. Now you can also get some delivery insights, like how many deployments happened, what are the most active applications, most successful pipelines, typical DORA-like metrics that we have, right? And I also have one more UI we added. I know that we have the I'm just logging into a dev, the latest version here, and hopefully it allows me to log in. If not, we'll skip here. Okay, there you go. It allows me to log in. So you can also get usage insights, right? For example, you can tell, hey, I'll have 23 applications enabled, have this many pipelines. If you have gates, like we talked about, autopilot gates, you can see how many gates are enabled right now and how many users are using my system. So these are things that are part of this. By the way, what I'm showing so far is basically free, and it's available as part of a community edition all the time. So some of the things you're seeing is essentially these are all the things that are like for free forever, right? Even if you say, I don't want to pay for Opsamex, you get many of these things for free. So you don't have to. You should definitely download and check it out if you're using Spinnaker. I think there's a lot of value that you can get. All right, so let's talk about verification, which is one of the things I talked about as interesting features that we have that allows you to verify different things. So if you are deploying, the Spinnaker, you are potentially deploying Canary or a blue-green or other kinds of deployment option methods. So then you want to enable the verification. The verification would show you, so we automatically analyze the logs and metrics and give you information about what are the issues that are found in logs and what are the issues that are found in metrics. And assuming my demo cooperates, so you can look at, for metrics, you can look at different API endpoints and how is that the score. You can obviously tag things as critical, essentially, which means that the user has said, hey, this is a critical metric, and if it fails, you want to put the score to 0, right? And that's what essentially happened. If you look here, this particular metric has a higher latency than the baseline release. This is the new version. This is a baseline version, and you are able to see that it is obviously significantly higher. So the score is essentially tagged as 0, and you get the metric 0. But also you can analyze the logs as well. So we can look at logs and errors and warnings in the logs, and be able to figure out, hey, there's a couple of errors that we found out, and that is not in the previous release. And the way we do with log analysis is that we have what we call unexpected and expected errors. Expected errors are errors that are repeating over time. So you can ignore them because it's repeating over time. Your production version had it, the new version has it, so you don't have to worry about them. so to say, right? Because you ignored it and made it to production before. New errors are what's interesting. New errors does not have to be like net new errors. It could be even be a scale factor. Let's say you happen to have one error in the production version, but you have 100 errors in the new version. And so even though it's repeating from a message perspective, the scale is vastly different, right? We also give you ability to reclassify the errors. Say there's, let's say we classified automatically to a critical error or error or warning. You can then reclassify to warning or ignore, for example. And that's something we allows you to do. So you can sort of give a supervised input in terms of errors and warnings. You can reclassify what is right and what is wrong, because the developers know when they see an error. Obviously, the system is learning over time. So when somebody gives an input, it'll learn it for that time, and then going forward, it'll tag it correctly. But for the first time, I don't know what the errors are, right? I mean, I would try to make a guess and give you the best answer possible, but sometimes we do, miscategorize them. So you as a developer has an opportunity to correct it, and then going forward, we'll learn from it. We also give you a different context for the errors. Let's say the same error happens in multiple scenarios. So I used to be a programmer, like back in the days when I wrote something, I didn't fix it in I fixed it in one area because I thought that I saw the error. I know where I broke the code, and I fixed it in that particular instance of that error, but I didn't realize that I missed on two other situations. So basically it gives me the context around multiple contexts for the same error message. And that really allows me to, as a developer, to go and fix it in all the contexts and whatnot. So that's the verification piece. And we are enhancing it further to look at data from different data sources besides today is essentially log and metric analysis. In the future, maybe the next release, you'll look at data from different sources like source code analysis and other data sources that we're already connecting with, and be able to give you additional data. So that's the verification piece. That's an interesting feature. Most people like it. One of the example I was just showing you, a customer example I was talking about, essentially they're using something like this. Now, you can have policies. We are leveraging the OPA policy engine in the back end. I think the difference between one is the ability to create both static and runtime policies, right? So what static policies are, think of it as the compliance policies or other kinds of policies that are there in the system, whether the pipeline is running or not. So they could be like, okay, you cannot remove a manual judgment stage or some sort of an approval gate before you go to production. That you cannot remove, let's say, a policy check, for example. So developers, even though they have access to the product and be able to modify, let's say, the pipeline, for example, but they can't like do things that you're not supposed to. For example, you can't remove a SOX compliance check for deployments, because then they'll defeat the whole purpose of these checks. So we can have these sort of compliance policies or static policies that are running all the time in the background, and that can be enabled out of the box, like blackout policies, right? These are things that are, blackout policy is something in runtime, because essentially whenever you run it, be worried about it. But you can also have things like policies that are leveraging data that we connect to, like SonarQube or Jenkins or Jira, for example. So in this case, an example of an automate approval policy, it checks 5 different sources. For example, it checks the SonarQube data and makes sure that the ratings are good. And it just checks the Jira to make sure the highest priority tickets are in a done status, so that it's not, like, people cannot have open tickets and then still try to approve it. It won't let you do it. You can also check the Jenkins output and make sure that the build was successful, or whatever the case you want to look at. You can look at our Autopilot, which is basically the score, risk scoring is less than 70 or whatnot, so, or greater than 70, whatever you can look at. If it basically is denying if it's less than 70 and it passes, it's over 70. And then you can look at JFrog and look at that data. So you can create as much data sources you can connect to. The data sources that I'm showing you, you can connect it on your own. You don't have to have ask us to do it. You can connect any new data source as well. We're obviously adding new data sources all the time, but you can also add your own data source. You can plug in a data source. All of the things you're seeing are all policy control. As you can see, everywhere there's a policy. That means the policy that I enable. This policy, for example, I can say enable for all groups. That means it's available for any group that you want to do, or just my group. This is really useful if I'm enabling self-service for multiple groups, right? You don't want one group does not necessarily want to share their policy with some other group, but there will be a global policy that's shared across all the groups, right? These kind of controls points we can enable as part of the system, right? So verification, one thing I didn't show you is not only that there's a deploy verification, there's also test verification. So you can enable verification during test runs, right? So let's say you have sort of a typical integration test, and you have multiple test cases. And in this case, there are 23 test cases that are part of this integration test. And we can analyze the logs and metrics during those test cases and during the test runs, essentially, and tell you there are 8 failures, potential failures that are part of this during the test run. This is very useful. For example, one of our customers have thousands of test cases, and they get tons of logs and metrics, and they don't actually have time to verify if the logs actually is anything in the logs that they should be worrying about, and they still push it to production, and something fails in production. They're like, well, I should have caught it early in the cycle. So this essentially prevents that problem, where you can run this verification during the different stages of the application, the pipeline. And if it finds something early in the process during the test run, in this case, let's say this test run, 8 of the test cases rather, there are total 22 test cases, 15 test cases passed, and during 8 test cases, it failed. When it says failed, it doesn't mean the test case itself failed from a test hardness perspective. Test hardness would have passed potentially to the test cases. Obviously, if it fails the test case hardness, the actual test case, you would know about it. Obviously, your QA would know about it. And these things are things that are sort of in addition to it, meaning in our case, we call it a failure because we saw some errors, some issues that are critical enough that we failed it. And that's really something useful that they can use in addition to what's going on. All right, so that's a demo. Again, all the things you see is available as part of the Autopilot Community Edition. There is some restriction in terms of number of security gates or number of gates you can enable. But other than that, a lot of the use cases like the dashboards and the insights and the policy, and you can use all of it. I think that for somebody who is using Spinnaker, for example, they may even appreciate the ability to add cloud providers, for example. Or if you have deploying to a remote agent, a remote cluster. Let's say you are in a central thing and you're trying to deploy to a remote cluster. We can actually deploy the agents. The agents are essentially allows you to have different things behind it. The agent essentially is a container, is basically a pod that gets deployed in the target cluster, and then Spinnaker then can deploy to it. Even though the Spinnaker cannot directly access the cluster, through the agent, it is able to access the cluster behind the firewall. Right. So in this particular case, this agent has many Kubernetes clusters behind it. Right. If you try to add this directly, it won't connect to the Kubernetes cluster because it is behind a firewall. But with the agent deployed, our agent deployed, you're able to basically then connect to those clusters. Even Jenkins server that's sitting behind that firewall, we can connect to it. And this is something you get as part of a community edition. You can really, see that you can add accounts, new accounts, so-called Spinnaker accounts, directly from the UI. Right? You don't have to go to HAL config and try to add an account, etc. You can sync the existing accounts, and then you can actually add new accounts. Same with integration. We saw the list before, and you can add a new integration. You can sync with the Spinnaker. So this allows you to create it in a UI, and all of these are access control. For example, this Jenkins instance that somebody added, you can have permissions. Obviously, in this case, it's permissions enabled for all of the users. But let's say you don't want to have this permission, this particular Jenkins be shown in the Spinnaker for some other user, then I can restrict to the user group, for example. And this is really nice because then each developing team can bring in their own DevOps tools essentially, and be able to add to the Spinnaker, and only they would see it, their group will see it. And we have obviously integration with LDAP or OAuth or whatever your backend authentication mechanism is. So everything, groups and things that you typically have already will be able to be leveraged here. All right, so that's all I have from a demo perspective. You can go to this and go to the opsmx.com/autopilot-trial and request it, and we'll send you the instructions to download today, and you can get started with the Autopilot Community Edition. You can, in terms of support, we have a Slack that you can connect to, and I'll send to people who are on the call today, and we'll put it on the website. When you go to this thing, you can connect to the community Slack and be able to ask any questions if you have any questions, and we were happy to be on the call if needed to help you out initially. Since you're doing this is community edition, new edition, we want to be available for any and every user who wants to try it out. With that, let me stop the presentation here. And let me see if I can, Ashley, you want to maybe do the Q&A, or you have any?
Sure, let me look into the chat. There was one question in here. Interesting one. How much sense does Spinnaker make for a small startup that has 10 to 15 Kubernetes microservices?
Yeah, so Aditya, thanks for the question. I think if you're that small, again, depending on what you want out of it, in terms of you saw some of the benefits you saw with our product. I mean, maybe the best way would be for you to just get a SaaS instance of Spinnaker. That way, you don't have the kind of the burden of managing Spinnaker from your point of view. From your point of view, you're getting everything you saw today and more fully managed for you, and you don't have to worry about it. Your team can just start deploying into it. But even if the cluster is behind a firewall, or you have your own EKS or whatever you're deploying it to, we can connect to it, and you're good to go. So you should be up and running within 2 hours or whatever with that model, I would say. If you have to do it on your own, the community edition of Spinnaker, people have challenges in terms of installing and managing that for that small of a use case. So that would be my sense. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have any more questions. You have my email address, just my first name at opsmx.io. Ashley, I think you had some other questions that you want to ask, right? I think
yeah, a couple of other ones that have come in. We already covered how can they get access to Autopilot. You put the URL up there, but we'll follow up after the webinar with the recording, etc. Is there any restriction with the CE version of Autopilot on the tool integrations and informed approvals? And I don't think there is.
Yeah, there is none, right? So everything you saw and more, you have access to the CE. The only restriction is sort of like the scale of deployment. For example, Aditya, you have 10, 15 microservices. You can just use our CE. And you don't have to actually pay anything because you're smaller use case, right? So that's exactly the point. We want to, obviously enable smaller teams like that to start getting more value out of Spinnaker, but obviously larger team, you may have to pay something. But there is no restriction to answer your question, Ashley, in terms of anything else.
Perfect. And one more question, if I may. And these are for the larger organizations, right? What is the process to lift restrictions? Say they got Autopilot CE and they go, oh, well, I've got more than 20 gates now, or I need more audit.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I
that's
think,
going to be a common.
Yeah. No, so you don't have to rip and replace or anything like that. You just have to get a license key to unlock it. I think, yeah, so it's, just reach out to us on our website or whatnot. By the way, if you're downloading it today anyway, we'll connect with you regardless, to see how we are going, how we are using the product, to give you any help. And so we'll be connected. But otherwise, typically you would just reach out to us on our website. Yeah, if if you haven't connected with us.
Awesome. I think that's it for all the questions. Thank you, everybody, for submitting them. Balaji, is there anything else you want to cover before we wrap up?
No, I think we're good. I think you can check out our website. There's other webinars that you can attend, obviously future webinars, as well as a recording of our past webinars. And if you need access to the Autopilot, I mean, the instructions, we'll send you the instructions for on-prem deployment, so you can just download it and install it in your premises. But if you say, I would rather play in with your SaaS edition, we are happy to do that also. So that's what I would say in terms of two options to get it. One is obviously the on-prem installation that you manage yourself, or you can say, I want to try your SaaS, if that makes sense for you.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. Thank you very much, Balaji. And certainly we'll get the recordings out there, and there'll be additional value-based webinars. We look forward to seeing everybody in our future webinars. Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation, demo, and everyone's attendance. See you soon.
Thank you, guys. See you.